I sold my house, my car, and emptied my entire life savings to pay for my daughter's dream wedding in Atlanta. Her thank you? She hid me behind the kitchen trash cans because she was embarrassed of her own mother. She thought I was garbage, but she forgot one very important thing about the woman she just threw away. I was about to remind her in a way she'd never forget. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this plays out. My name is Rosalind Harper, and at 73 years old, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. I was wrong. I spent 43 years as a high school English teacher in a small town outside of Nashville, Tennessee. Not a glamorous life by most standards, but it was honest work that I was proud of. After my husband Harold passed 5 years ago, I lived quietly in our modest home, content with my routine of reading, gardening, and volunteering at the local library. My daughter Sienna was my pride and joy, my only child. She'd always been ambitious, destined for bigger things than our small Tennessee town could offer. When she got accepted to Emory University in Atlanta for her MBA, I was bursting with pride. The tuition was steep, but I didn't hesitate. I took out loans, used my savings, and worked extra tutoring sessions to help make her dream come true. After graduation, Sienna landed a prestigious marketing job in Atlanta. She thrived, got promoted, moved to a sleek Buckhead apartment, and began running in circles I'd only read about in magazines. Then she met Ashton Whitmore III. Ashton came from old Atlanta money, the kind of family that had buildings named after them. His father owned luxury hotels across the Southeast. When Sienna first told me about him, I could hear the change in her voice. She was trying so hard to fit into his world, adopting an affected accent, using words like divine and absolutely smashing. "Mama," she'd say during our weekly calls, "you don't understand how things work here. Image is everything. The right connections, the right events, the right appearance, it all matters." When Ashton proposed, the wedding planning began immediately. "We're having the ceremony at the Whitmore estate," she told me excitedly. "The ballroom can accommodate 300 guests. 300 guests. In our little town, a big wedding might have 50 people. "That sounds lovely, honey," I said carefully. "What can I do to help?" There was a pause that lasted too long. "Well, Mama, there is one thing. The venue fee. It's separate from family contributions. With my salary and student loans, I just can't cover it." "How much are we talking about, sweetheart?" $65,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. It was nearly everything I had left in retirement savings. "I know it's a lot, but this is once in a lifetime. It's so important to Ashton's family that I can contribute at their level." I sat in my quiet kitchen and felt the weight of what she was asking. But she was my daughter, and I wanted her to be happy. That night, I made the hardest decision of my life. I called the bank the next morning and started the process of selling everything. The decision to sell my home was not made in a single night, nor even in a single week. It crept upon me slowly, in the sleepless hours when memories pressed against my chest like weights I could no longer carry. That house was not just brick and wood. It was my history, my anchor, my proof that I had lived a life full of love and purpose. Every corner held a story. The faint pencil marks on the kitchen door frame where I had measured Sienna's height each birthday. The oak dining table where Harold carved the Thanksgiving turkey, his steady hands guiding ours as he told old family stories. The garden roses that returned faithfully each spring, no matter how neglectful the winter had been. Even the creak of the floorboards at night felt like a companion. The day the for sale sign was hammered into the front yard, I stood at the window and watched it sway in the breeze. My throat tightened. Neighbors passed and stared. Some stopped to ask, gently, if it was really true. "Rosalind, you're not moving, are you? This house is a part of you," Mrs. Donahue said, pressing a basket of muffins into my hands. I forced a smile. It's time. Things change. That was all I could manage. Inside, I was breaking. Packing was agony. Each object seemed to resist my touch, clinging to the life it represented. I wrapped Sienna's first ballet slippers in soft paper, holding them far longer than necessary, the memory of her tiny feet dancing through my mind. I found Harold's cufflinks tucked into a jewelry box, tarnished but still gleaming faintly, relics of evenings when he had worn his best suit and taken my hand as if I were still the young woman he'd married. At night, I wandered the rooms, brushing my fingers against the walls as though memorizing their textures. I sat in Harold's armchair by the window until dawn, hearing echoes of his laughter in the silence. More than once, I wept openly, no longer caring if the movers would find my eyes red when they arrived. The day of the move, I stood in the driveway while men carried away the last of my furniture. When they lifted the oak dining table, the same one where Sienna had blown out candles year after year, I nearly told him to put it back, but I didn't. I swallowed the cry that rose in my throat and let it go. A young couple buying the house approached me, glowing with expectation. The wife touched my arm gently. "We'll take good care of it. This home has such warmth." I nodded, managing a broken smile. "I know you will." Later, in the sterile office where I signed the final papers, the pen felt heavier than any weight I had ever carried. The numbers written on that check would cover the costs of Sienna's wedding, the designer gown, the grand reception hall, the live orchestra, dreams she could never afford on her own. Dreams I had decided I would give her, even if it meant stripping myself of everything familiar. When I stepped into my new apartment for the first time, the silence was deafening. No creaking floorboards, no roses in the garden, no history embedded in the walls. Just bare white paint and the faint smell of fresh plaster. That night, I lay awake on a bed that felt foreign, listening for sounds that never came. But I told no one. To Sienna, I said only, "It feels good to start fresh, darling. At my age, a new chapter can be exciting." She believed me, or at least pretended to. To my friends, I spoke of downsizing, of convenience, of being closer to the city. They nodded politely, none of them knowing that when I returned home from lunches and book club meetings, I cried into my pillow, grieving a life I had willingly surrendered. That I reminded myself again and again, this is for her. Each time I opened the folder of invoices, deposits for the catering, the hall, the orchestra, I whispered aloud, "Sienna will have everything she deserves." And so I gave up my house, my neighborhood, my garden, even my sense of belonging, so my daughter could walk into a ballroom draped in white flowers and believe for one perfect evening that she was a princess. I gave her my home. I gave her my future. I gave her everything. The wedding day should have been a triumph. I had imagined it countless times in the months leading up to it. Sienna walking down the aisle in her gown, her face glowing with joy, the hall filled with laughter and music, the proud moment when people would look at her and see what I'd always seen, my daughter, radiant and deserving. I arrived at the hotel the evening before, carrying nothing more than a small suitcase and a heart full of quiet satisfaction. The ballroom gleamed, draped in flowers and polished silver, just as I'd hoped. Every detail had been paid for, down to the candles on each table, their flickering lights softening the edges of the room. I told myself the sacrifices had been worth it. My house, my garden, my comfort, all of it had been traded for this moment. As I checked into the modest single room they had reserved for me, I reminded myself, this is her day, not mine. I am only here to witness her happiness. But the first pang of unease struck at dinner. I noticed the seating chart displayed on a gilded easel outside the rehearsal hall. My name was there, but placed in the far corner, at a table with distant acquaintances. Not at the family table, not near Sienna, not beside my son-in-law's parents who were seated in the place of honor. I swallowed my hurt and told myself it was a simple mistake. The next morning I dressed carefully. I chose a pale blue gown, elegant but not ostentatious, a color Harold had always said suited me.
I pinned my silver hair neatly, slipping on the pearl necklace he had given me for our 25th anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I whispered, "Harold, she's going to be beautiful. You'd be so proud." When I entered the bridal suite to see Sienna, I expected a smile, perhaps even tears of gratitude. Instead, she barely glanced at me. She was surrounded by bridesmaids, their laughter filling the room, her makeup artist fussing with her veil. "Mom," she said, briskly, "you look nice. Just please remember not to fuss during the ceremony, okay? This is my day." Her words stung. I had given her everything, and she feared I might embarrass her. I nodded silently and stepped back, feeling like a guest instead of a mother. The ceremony itself was dazzling. The music swelled, Sienna walked down the aisle like a vision, and the guests murmured with admiration. I wept quietly, my tears hidden behind a folded program. Every vow they exchanged felt like a thread stitching together the future I had helped create. But the reception, that was where my heart shattered. When the master of ceremonies announced the family introductions, I waited for my name, expecting to be called up beside Sienna and Ashton to stand as the woman who had raised her, who had made this day possible. Instead, I heard Ashton's parents introduced as the proud family, followed by cheers and applause. My name was never spoken. I remained seated at the corner table, hands trembling in my lap, while strangers clapped for others as though I were invisible. I told myself perhaps there had been a mistake, that my moment would come later. But it didn't. Through speeches, through toasts, through photographs, my name was never called. The photographer passed my table dozens of times, capturing shots of friends, of business partners, of distant relatives. He never once turned his lens toward me. By the time the cake was cut, I realized the truth. I was not part of this story. I was a shadow at its edges. Later, I slipped outside, away from the music and the chatter. The night air was cool, and the fountain in front of the hotel sparkled under the lights. I sat on a stone bench, clutching the edges of my gown, and tried to steady my breathing. How had it come to this? I had given up my home, my future, my very sense of belonging. And for what? To sit in the corner? To be forgotten? To be erased? I thought of Harold then, his voice echoing in memory. "Rosie, don't ever let people mistake your kindness for weakness." Tears blurred my vision. I realized I had done exactly that. I had mistaken sacrifice for love, silence for devotion, and in the end, I had allowed myself to be erased from my own daughter's story. It was in that moment, sitting alone by the fountain while laughter spilled from the ballroom, that a seed of resolve began to grow inside me. I didn't yet know what form it would take or how far it would go, but I knew this: I would not remain invisible forever. Not to Sienna, not to anyone. I might have left the wedding with only bitterness, if not for the photographer. Grief has a way of convincing you that invisibility is permanent, that once you've been erased, it's too late to redraw yourself. But the morning after the reception, while the hotel staff peeled the night on the ballroom like old wallpaper, a stranger placed a photograph in my hands and returned me to myself. I was sitting in the lobby with my suitcase at my feet, watching a pair of attendants strip white satin from the banisters. The roses that had looked so lavish under candlelight were limp now, their heads drooping over plastic bins lined with black bags. The chandelier still threw light onto the marble floor, but the brightness felt clinical, like a hospital operating room after a life has already slipped away. All that beauty, all that money, dismantled by Minoon. I thought of my house, the pencil marks on the kitchen door frame, the roses, Harold's armchair, and felt the familiar ache of something dismantled too quickly to say goodbye to. "Mrs. Hartwell?" a voice asked, gentle, careful, as if testing a step on thin ice. I looked up. The wedding photographer stood a few feet away, camera strap still looped around his neck, though the camera itself had been set aside. He was tall and a bit rumpled, with the kind of tired eyes that only belong to people who pay attention. "Yes," I said, my voice hoarse from a night of silence. "I'm Sienna's mother." He nodded, then hesitated in a way that made me brace for pity. Instead, he offered me a folder, plain, manila, not the luxurious envelopes the planner had used for everything else. Inside, there was a single print. It was a candid of me, taken from a distance. I was at the corner table, hands folded, watching Sienna dance with Ashton under the chandeliers. The expression on my face was unguarded, love threaded through with a kind of sorrow I had not intended anyone to witness. I could see the exact second of realization in my eyes, that the night would go on perfectly without me, that no one would ever notice I had not been asked to the family photos, and that my name would not be spoken aloud. "You should have this," he said. "You weren't in the formals, not in any of them." I kept staring at the photograph. It felt like evidence, not proof that I had been excluded, I already knew that, but proof that I had existed there at all. I could not bring myself to look up. "No," I said, finally, and swallowed. "I wasn't in them." He shifted his weight. I tried. During the bridal party lineup, I asked for bride with mother, like I always do. The planner checked her list and said, "We're skipping that one." I thought it was an oversight. I asked again after the toasts. She said it wasn't on the shot list. He paused, and his voice went soft. "I'm sorry." The shot list. I repeated the words as if they held an answer. I had seen the clipboard in the planner's hands all day, covered in boxes and times and abbreviations that looked like choreography. I had not imagined I could be crossed out with the stroke of a pen. "Sometimes the couple gives a list that's curated," he said. "It saves time, keeps us on schedule." He cleared his throat, careful with me. "Last night it cut you out." The words landed with a clear, cold accuracy. There was no malice in them, and that made them worse. I looked down at the print again. The composition was beautiful. The light pooled in the curve of my cheekbone, the arc of the chandelier echoed by the arc of Sienna's veil in the distance. But what seized my breath wasn't the beauty. It was the fact that I was finally centered in a frame, even if by accident. "Why did you take this?" I asked. He smiled a little, not quite meeting my eyes. "Because the way you were looking at her, that's the whole point of weddings. Everyone else is celebrating themselves. You were loving her." He tucked his hands into his pockets like a man reminding himself not to overstep. "Also because I know what it is to have a mother who gives everything and ends up in the edges of every picture." I looked up then. "Your mother?" He raised me alone, and the details emerged in simple brushstrokes, long shifts, secondhand coats, a kitchen table scarred by homework and hot pans. I used to crop her out of photos because I thought the birthday cake looked better without the clutter. Years later, I'd have given anything to see her elbow in the frame. The lobby noise dimmed, the checkout carts rolling past, the quiet murmur at the reception desk. For a moment, it was just his story and mine, overlapping like translucent negatives. "What's your name?" I asked. It felt important to know, to anchor this unexpected kindness to a person and not only to a lens. "Marcus," he said. "Marcus Hale." "Thank you, Mr. Hale." "Marcus," he corrected gently. "If you'll let me, I'd like to take a portrait of you. Not for the album. This isn't about them. For you." "For me," I repeated, as if the phrase belonged in a foreign language. I had bought a ballroom and a string quartet and an entire night of other people's joy, and somehow the idea of a single photograph for myself felt extravagant. He sensed my hesitation. 10 minutes. Outside. Morning light is forgiving. I followed him through the revolving doors into a clean, bright air that smelled faintly of damp roses and hotel coffee. The fountain still whispered to itself. I recognized the stone bench where I had sat the night before, holding the edges of my gown like a child steadying herself on a bicycle. He chose a spot near the balustrade where the light slipped in at an angle. He told me to turn my shoulders slightly, my chin up a touch, and breathe. I obeyed, awkward at first, then steadier as the rhythm of his voice softened the stiffness in my spine. A strange calm took hold, a sense that I could occupy space without apology. He didn't fuss with my hair or ask me to smile. He didn't try to transform me into a woman I was not. He simply watched for the moment when I arrived inside myself and then pressed the shutter. The sound was quiet, a simple click, but it felt ceremonial, like the sealing of a letter or the closing of a locket. Again, he said, think of something that makes you feel proud. I didn't have to search. I saw Sienna at 5, at 10, at 15, elbows bony, cheeks flushed, the particular tilt of her head when she concentrated on tying her shoes or writing her name. I saw Harold at the dining table, carving the turkey. I saw the pencil marks on the door frame and the roses stubbornly returning each spring. I thought of the boxes labeled treasures not for sale. Pride arrived not as triumph, but as endurance. He took 3 frames, 4. Then he lowered the camera and nodded to himself, satisfied. That's the one, he said, tapping the back of the camera with his finger. You look like you. I laughed, startled by the sound, and realized how long it had been since I'd heard it. I look old, I said, but without apology. You look like a woman who didn't disappear, he said. Back in the lobby, he asked for an address. I'll print it properly, he promised. Matte paper, archival ink, it'll last. For how long? I asked, absurdly. He smiled. Long enough. We parted there. I rode to my apartment with a single Candid in my bag, half afraid I'd damage it. The city rolled past my window, a laundromat with a crooked sign, a child dragging a glittering helium balloon, a man hosing down a strip of sidewalk like he was baptizing it. I felt raw and newly skinned, as if the morning had keeled away the numbness and left only the live nerve. At home, I cleared a space on my small desk and leaned the Candid against a stack of bills. The woman in the photograph looked like someone I recognized but had not greeted in years. That afternoon, my phone lit up with messages from Sienna. Photos of centerpieces, a screenshot of a video where she and Ashton spun under falling confetti, a link to a shared album carefully curated by the planner. There were hundreds of images. None of them included me. I scrolled until my thumb ached. Smiling friends, champagne flutes, the flower girls asleep on a couch like kittens, Ashton's parents glowing at the head table. In a single wide shot of the room, I spotted the corner where I had sat. My dress was a thumbprint of pale blue, and my face was turned away, blurred by motion and distance. If I zoomed in, my pixels broke apart. A week later, an envelope arrived. Heavy paper, my name written in a deliberate hand. Inside was the portrait Marcus had promised, mounted on a subtle white mat with room to breathe around the edges. He had included a note. You were there. You are here. M. I propped it next to the Candid and sat down. The portrait stunned me. He had been right. The light was forgiving, but it hadn't been flattering in the dishonest way I'd come to distrust. It had revealed the map of my life and somehow refused to diminish me for it. The corner of my mouth held the ghost of a smile I recognized from the year Sienna learned to ride a bike. The eyes were Harold's favorite part of my face, steady, he used to say, like the horizon. Under the portrait, he'd tucked a smaller sheet, a contact sheet of tiny thumbnails from the reception. He had circled some in pencil, frames where my shoulder appeared at the edge, where my hand held a napkin, where my profile could be guessed from the faintest suggestion of a cheekbone. In the margin, he had written, evidence. I laughed, then cried, then laughed again. It felt like standing on a shoreline where grief broke and reformed in the space of a breath. That evening, I made tea and placed the portrait where the afternoon sun would catch it. I stayed there for a long time, watching light creep across the mat and then fade. I thought about the shot list, the way a single unchecked box could erase a person. I thought about the planner's pen, the casual authority with which she'd crossed out bride with mother. I thought with a dawning clarity that felt like anger and relief at once of how easily I had complied with being uninvited to my own life. The next morning, I wrote to Marcus. Would it be possible to see the unedited set? Not for the album, for myself. I need to know where I was standing, even when no one else cared. He replied within an hour. I can't release the couple's selections without permission, but I can show you what I shot. Come by the studio tomorrow, 3 p.m. If you're comfortable, bring something you'd wear if no one was going to photograph you. I wasn't sure what that meant until I stood in front of my closet and realized how many of my choices were made for other people's eyes. I chose soft trousers and a sweater Harold liked because it made my shoulders look less tense. I wore no necklace, no pearls, no armor. I arrived at Marcus's studio, a narrow space above a bakery that smelt like cinnamon and heat, and I climbed the stairs feeling for once that I was entering somewhere entirely for me. He had the images ready on a large monitor. Here, he said, and the screen filled with the rehearsal lineups, the pre-ceremony bustle, the first dances. He clicked through at a respectful pace. Where most people would have rushed, he let each image breathe. He hovered over the group formals. "There," he said, enlarging a shot where the planner's clipboard edged into the frame. On it, a neat list of groupings and times. A narrow red line crossed through bride and mother. I stared at it until the text blurred. It was such a small stroke. It had felt like a tidal wave when it hit me. On the screen, it looked like nothing. "I'm sorry," he said, again, and I believed he meant it, not as apology for his part, but for the world's casual way of excusing itself. "Show me the rest," I said. He did. Between the official frames were the ones he had taken with a photographer's stubborn conscience, a sliver of me reflected in a window, my hands resting on my lap, fingertips touching like someone praying without admitting it, my face as I watched Sienna laugh at a joke that did not include me. None of these were meant for the album. All of them were proof of my life as it happened.
When he was done, Marcus turned off the monitor. The room felt suddenly intimate, the hum of the street below, the smell of yeast and sugar drifting up through the floorboards. He poured coffee from a thermos and handed me a cup, then sat on a stool with the openness of someone who knows silence can be a kind of company. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all of this," I said, half to him, half to the portrait tucked into my bag. "Maybe you don't have to know yet," he said. "Maybe be seen is the first step." Be seen. The phrase lodged somewhere behind my breastbone. I thought of the years I had spent becoming strategically small so that Sienna's life could be large. I thought of selling my house, of signing away the last pieces of my history so hers would look perfect in photographs. I thought of how easily everyone had accepted the perfect version without asking what it had cost. Would you take more?" I asked, not posed, just me, walking, reading, making tea, proof that I was here. He nodded. "Let's do a walk. There's a park by the river, evening light." We went that same day. The path wound along the water, willows trailing their green fingers in the current. People passed us in pairs, joggers, parents pushing strollers, teenagers with earbuds and private weather systems. Marcus walked a few steps behind me, then beside me, then ahead, letting me move the way I would if I were alone. He didn't choreograph anything. He let me stop to watch a heron lift itself from the shallows and settle on a rock like a folded umbrella. He let me tie my sweater around my waist when the breeze warmed. He let me exist. Every now and then, he lifted the camera. The click felt like a heartbeat, not intrusive, simply present. At one point, I rested my hand on the railing and looked down at the river's stippled surface. "Hold that," he said softly. "You look like you're talking to someone you miss." "I am," I said, and he took the picture. By the time the light thinned into gold, we had made a loop back to the studio. He promised proofs within a week. "No rush," I said, though I felt urgency buzzing under my skin like a secret. I paid him on the spot, and he protested. I insisted. "You're working, and I am done asking women to work for free." He laughed at that, an easy surprise sound, and I realized that I had made a joke without meaning to. It felt like a small muscle warming after a long winter. That night, I spread my invoices on the table, catering, orchestra, venue, and placed the two photographs at the top like bookends, the candid from the reception, the portrait from the morning after. Between them, the list of things I had given away. For the first time, I did not feel only the loss. I felt the outline of a plan, not yet drawn, but undeniable. Not revenge, not humiliation. Something cleaner, a way to reclaim the truth of what had happened, and more importantly, who I had been all along. Be seen, Marcus had said. Perhaps the first step was refusing the erasures I had once accepted as inevitable. Perhaps the second was learning how to speak in a world that had trained me to whisper. I turned off the light and stood a moment in the doorway, looking back at the pictures holding their quiet vigil on the table. "Tomorrow," I told them. "We start tomorrow." Outside, the night gathered itself like a shawl. Inside, for the first time since the ballroom, I felt the warmth of a story returning to its rightful narrator.
That was the moment everything changed. Marcus was offering me agency, asking me to become an active participant in my own story rather than just a victim. I want to document this, the real story of where the mother of the bride is sitting,
what she sacrificed, and how she's being treated by people who took her money and discarded her dignity. A photo essay. Artistic, powerful images that tell the truth. Something that shows the world who Sienna Harper really is beneath all that polish. The beauty of his suggestion was breathtaking. Sienna had tried to erase me from her perfect day, but Marcus was offering to make me the star of an entirely different story. And what would you do with these photos? Marcus grinned. Mrs. Harper, do you know what social media is? Oh, I knew exactly what social media was. I'd been teaching high school until 5 years ago. I'd watched entire social circles rise and fall based on a single Instagram post. I knew the power of a viral story, especially one with clear heroes and villains. The wedding photos, the official ones, won't be ready for weeks, but a photo essay about the real story behind this wedding, that could be online by tomorrow morning. The implications were delicious. Sienna and Ashton were probably planning to spend their honeymoon posting carefully curated photos, basking in congratulations and envy. Instead, they would wake up to find themselves at the center of a completely different narrative. Mr. Reeves, if we do this, there's no going back. This will destroy my relationship with my daughter permanently. It will humiliate her and her new husband in front of everyone they're trying to impress. Marcus met my eyes steadily. Mrs. Harper, with respect, I don't think you have a relationship with your daughter anymore. What kind of person takes their mother's life savings and then seats her with garbage? He was right. Sienna had already destroyed our relationship the moment she'd chosen to prioritize social climbing over her mother's dignity. All right, Mr. Reeves, let's tell the real story. What followed was the most empowering hour of my life. Marcus approached the project with a true artist's eye. He crafted a visual narrative that was impossible to misinterpret. Every shot was carefully composed to highlight the contrast between the wedding's opulence and the degrading treatment I was receiving. He photographed me sitting in the folding chair, my champagne dress elegant and my posture dignified, while the stainless steel trash bins loomed beside me like chrome monuments to my daughter's contempt. He captured wide shots showing the full context, how far I was from the celebration, how deliberately I'd been isolated from the joy I'd paid to create. Through the cracked ballroom door, he photographed the elegant reception, guests in designer clothes laughing over champagne, the couple dancing, the elaborate arrangements my money had helped pay for. Then he'd turn the camera back to me, sitting alone with the garbage. When you sold your house to pay for this wedding, what did you think your role would be today? I thought I'd be in the front row. I thought I'd walk my daughter down the aisle since her father isn't here. I thought I'd give a toast at the reception. And instead, I'm sitting like a shameful secret, listening to my daughter celebrate while sitting next to the trash. In one series, he had me look directly into the camera. I didn't look sad or angry. I channeled the collective strength of every woman who had faced disrespect with unwavering grace. I looked regal. I looked defiant. I looked unbreakable. When he finished, Marcus lowered his camera. I have what we need. The story will be impossible to ignore. We moved quickly. I called the hotel and extended my stay for another week. Then I made the call that would seal my daughter's fate. I called a lawyer. Sarah Chen was a family attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases. When I explained the situation, she was immediately interested. Mrs. Harper, what you're describing could potentially fall under several legal theories: financial exploitation of an elderly person, intentional infliction of emotional distress, possibly even fraud. Saturday night, as the wedding reception ended and guests began departing, Marcus published the post. The caption was a masterpiece. This is Rosalind Harper. She's 73 years old, a retired teacher from Tennessee. 3 months ago, she sold her house, the home she had lived in for 30 years, to pay the $65,000 venue fee for her daughter's wedding. This is where her daughter chose to seat her during the ceremony, next to the trash bins in a service corridor, hidden from all the guests whose approval she desperately wanted. The mother who sacrificed everything was treated like garbage. But this photo essay isn't about cruelty. It's about dignity. Look at Mrs. Harper's face. Look at her posture. Look at the grace with which she endures being erased from her daughter's perfect day. This is what real class looks like. But what happened next would teach them that some mistakes can never be undone.
The response was immediate and explosive. Within the first hour, the post had 1,000 likes and hundreds of comments. By midnight, it had been shared over 10,000 times. By Sunday morning, it was trending on Twitter. The comments were everything I could have hoped for. I am sobbing. This beautiful woman gave up everything for her daughter, and this is how she was repaid? The audacity of taking someone's life savings and then treating them like this. I hope this ruins their marriage. Look at her face. Look at the dignity. She's a queen sitting on a throne of her daughter's shame. $65,000. She paid for this wedding and they put her with the trash cans? Social media detectives are relentless when they catch the scent of injustice. Within 12 hours, someone had figured out which wedding this was, found Sienna's Instagram account, and began flooding her comments with outrage. Her carefully curated photos were now accompanied by hundreds of comments asking why she treated her mother so cruelly. Ashton's LinkedIn was discovered next, then his family's hotel business. The Whitmore hotel chain's social media accounts were bombarded with people saying they would never stay at properties that would tolerate such treatment of an elderly woman. By Monday morning, I had interview requests from Good Morning America, CNN, Fox News, Inside Edition, and a dozen other television programs. I accepted 3 interviews. Each followed the same pattern. The host would express shock and outrage at the photos. I would calmly explain the sequence of events, and then I would deliver the line that guaranteed maximum impact. I don't want anyone's pity. I want people to understand that this is what happens when children are raised to value social status over human decency. My daughter chose to prioritize the opinions of strangers over the dignity of the woman who raised her. She's an adult, and adults face consequences for their choices. Justice for Rosalind became a rallying cry that transcended the original wedding story and became a broader conversation about how society treats elderly family members. But the most satisfying moment came when I received a panicked phone call from Sienna. "Mama, you have to make this stop," she sobbed. "Please, you have to tell them to stop." I was sitting in my hotel room watching her wedding photos disappear from her Instagram account one by one. "Make what stop, darling?" I asked with perfect calm. "The posts, the comments, the phone calls. Reporters are calling Ashton's parents. They're asking the hotel about their family values. Our friends won't talk to us. People are canceling reservations. You have to fix this." "I'm afraid I don't understand what you want me to fix. I haven't posted anything untrue." "But you're destroying our lives." The irony was so perfect, I almost laughed. "Sweetheart, I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply allowing people to see the choices you made. If those choices are destroying your life, that's unfortunate, but it's not my fault." "I'll pay you back," she said desperately. "The $65,000, I'll pay it back. Just please make the story go away." "Oh, that's very thoughtful, but I'm afraid it's too late for that. You see, I've retained legal counsel. Sarah Chen, perhaps you've heard of her? She specializes in elder abuse cases." The silence on the other end was profound. "You're suing me?" she whispered. "I'm exploring all of my legal options, just like you explored all of your seating options when you put me next to the trash cans." "You know what, darling? When I was sitting in that service corridor, I realized something important. You were never going to respect me as long as you thought I was powerless. You took my money because you knew I'd give it to you. You hid me away because you thought I'd accept it quietly. But you forgot something crucial about your mother, Sienna. I didn't survive 43 years of teaching high school by being a pushover. I commanded respect in my classroom, and I'll command it in my family too."
The real victory was watching Sienna's carefully constructed social world collapse around her. In the rarefied social ecosystem of Buckhead, Atlanta, image isn't just everything, it's the only thing. And the one thing that ecosystem cannot tolerate is a story that reveals the ugly truth beneath the polished veneer. My photo essay wasn't just a collection of photographs, it was a social bomb. The Whitmore family, horrified by the negative publicity surrounding their hotel chain, quietly disinvited Sienna and Ashton from family events. The country club revoked their membership. Friends who had once competed for invitations to their parties now crossed the street to avoid them. Ashton's career suffered too.
His position at his father's company became untenable as clients expressed concern about being associated with the family that had mistreated an elderly woman. The story became legend in their world, whispered at brunch tables and over cocktails at exclusive clubs. Sienna was instantly recast as the villain, the ungrateful daughter who took her mother's money and then hid her by the trash. Their carefully crafted image was shattered irrevocably. They were pariahs in their own paradise. The lawsuit moved forward with remarkable speed. The financial records were undeniable, the photographic evidence was devastating, and the viral nature of the story meant that any jury would be predisposed to see me as a sympathetic victim. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source, the wedding coordinator who had seated me in the service corridor. When contacted by the media, she initially refused to comment, but as the story gained national attention, she eventually gave an interview to protect her own reputation. I was just following the bride's instructions. She was very specific about where her mother should be seated. She said, and I quote, "Put her somewhere she won't embarrass us, somewhere the important guests won't have to see her." She said her mother was not the image they wanted to project. That interview was the final nail in Sienna's coffin. The case never went to trial. Faced with overwhelming evidence and public opinion completely against them, Sienna and Ashton's lawyers advised them to settle. The settlement was more generous than I had expected. Full repayment of the $65,000 plus punitive damages that brought the total to just over $100,000. There was also a formal written apology, which I insisted be made public. The marriage, built on mutual social ambition rather than genuine love, couldn't survive the stress. Within 18 months, Sienna and Ashton were embroiled in a bitter divorce. The financial pressure was crushing. The legal settlement, combined with the loss of Ashton's job and the collapse of their social network, forced them to sell their expensive Atlanta home. Eventually, unable to bear the constant recognition in Atlanta, Sienna moved away. Not back to our hometown in Tennessee, she was too proud for that, but to a small city where she could start over with some anonymity. She got a job at a regional marketing company for half the salary she'd been making before the scandal. But the internet is forever, and the story followed her everywhere. I heard all of this through mutual acquaintances. Sienna and I never spoke again after the settlement was finalized. There was no tearful reconciliation. The damage was too complete, the betrayal too profound. She had made her choice on that September day. I had simply ensured that choice had consequences. With the settlement money and proceeds from my house sale, I bought a charming cottage in a retirement community outside Nashville. It was smaller than my old house, but it was comfortable and it was mine. The community had a book club, a garden society, and neighbors who appreciated intelligence and wit over social status. I volunteered at the local library 3 days a week, helping seniors learn to use computers and navigate social media. The viral fame from the wedding story had mostly died down, though I still occasionally got messages from people thanking me for standing up for myself. Some were from elderly people who'd been mistreated by their families. Others were from younger people who said my story inspired them to set boundaries with toxic relatives. What I hadn't anticipated was how my story would inspire others to take action against their own family members who'd been taking advantage of them. Within months, I started receiving letters, hundreds of them, from people who said my experience had given them the courage to stand up for themselves. Each letter represented someone who had learned the lesson I had to learn the hard way, that family relationships should enhance your life, not diminish it. One letter came from a woman named Patricia in Oregon. She was 78 years old, and her son had been systematically draining her savings account to fund his gambling addiction. "Reading about your courage gave me the strength to contact an attorney," she wrote. "I filed for a restraining order and I'm pursuing criminal charges. Thank you for showing me that being a good mother doesn't mean being a doormat." Another letter came from a young woman whose parents had been using emotional manipulation to control her life choices. "Your story helped me realize that my parents' definition of love was actually control. I've moved across the country and started a new life. Thank you for showing me that it's okay to choose my own dignity over their approval."
The letters kept coming, and I began to realize that my story had become more than just a viral moment. It had become a catalyst for a broader conversation about toxic family dynamics and the importance of maintaining dignity in relationships. I began accepting invitations to speak at conferences about elder abuse, women's empowerment events, and podcasts. Each appearance was an opportunity to share the lesson I had learned, that respect is not given freely. It must be commanded through your actions. My message was always the same. You teach people how to treat you. If you accept disrespect, you will receive more disrespect. If you sacrifice your dignity for someone else's comfort, you will find that your comfort matters to no one. The response was overwhelming. People would approach me after my talks with tears in their eyes, sharing stories of their own family dysfunction. I always told them the same thing. Start by believing that you deserve better. Everything else follows from that fundamental belief. What surprised me most was how my story resonated beyond just family relationships. The phrase "seated with the garbage" became a cultural shorthand for being deliberately marginalized or disrespected. 2 years after the wedding, a documentary filmmaker convinced me to participate in her project. Dignity at Any Age premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and went on to win several awards. The success of the documentary led to offers from publishers. The book, Seated with Dignity, A Mother's Journey from Humiliation to Empowerment, became a bestseller. I donated a significant portion of the book's proceeds to organizations that worked with elder abuse victims and family violence survivors. The money I had originally lost to my daughter's cruelty had been transformed into resources that would help other people in similar situations.
5 years after the wedding, I received one last letter that would stay with me forever. It was from a young mother in California whose teenage daughter had been treating her with increasing disrespect, skipping school, stealing money, bringing drugs into the house. I kept making excuses for her, the woman wrote, but after reading your book, I realized I wasn't helping her, I was enabling her. I was teaching her that disrespecting me had no consequences. The woman had implemented clear consequences for her daughter's behavior. She removed privileges when rules were broken. She called the police when her daughter brought drugs into the house. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. She was furious with me. But you know what? After about 6 months, something changed. She started following the rules. She stopped stealing. She apologized for the first time in years. And last week, she thanked me for not giving up on her. The letter ended with words that brought tears to my eyes. You taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to refuse to accept their worst behavior. My daughter respects me now, and more importantly, she's learning to respect herself. Thank you for showing me that being a good mother doesn't mean being a pushover. That letter crystallized everything I had learned from my experience with Sienna. Sometimes love requires you to be strong rather than soft. Sometimes caring for someone means refusing to enable their cruelty. Sometimes the most nurturing thing you can do is to enforce consequences that help someone become a better person. As I approached my 78th birthday, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from that service corridor to where I was now. I had lost a daughter, but gained a voice. I had sacrificed a relationship, but preserved my dignity. The lesson I tried to share in all my speeches and writings was simple but powerful. You cannot control how other people treat you, but you can control how you respond to that treatment. People often asked me if I regretted the choice I made that day in the service corridor. My answer was always the same. I didn't lose my daughter that day. I lost her the moment she chose to prioritize her social climbing over her mother's dignity. What I did was refuse to pretend that loss hadn't happened. The woman who could seat her mother with garbage was not the daughter I had raised. That daughter had died somewhere along the way, replaced by someone who saw relationships as transactions and family members as assets or liabilities. I mourned that loss, but I didn't regret refusing to enable the person she had become. In the end, I had taught the world and myself that dignity is not negotiable. It's not something you trade away for peace or sacrifice for someone else's comfort or surrender in the hope that love will somehow make cruelty acceptable. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept the unacceptable. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the knowledge that you are worth more than someone else's opinion of you. And sometimes when someone shows you who they really are, the most loving thing you can do is believe them. Tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from, and how would you rate this story from 0 to 10? But more importantly, what situation in your own life might benefit from a little less acceptance and a little more self-respect? Because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting free. And freedom, my friends, is always worth fighting for.